I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and associate producer of Poured Over, and today I am so excited to be joined by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is an author, a professor, a teacher of all things, and a great giver of knowledge, the author of Braiding, Sweetgrass, and now I'm so excited for us to be talking about the Serviceberry, so thank you so much for joining us today.
So glad to be with you, Jenna.
When I first saw this book, I was so excited to sort of get back into this tone that you create so easily, this knowledge that you're able to give to us, and sort of a reflection that you're able to hold up for us to be able to look at ourselves and look at our society and our lives from a little bit of a different perspective. So I was hoping that you could start by just sort of giving us the overview of the Serviceberry and what you wanted to do with this book.
Well, yeah, I love the way you introduced that because for me, the Serviceberry was the same thing. It was something I was really deeply curious about and realized that when Emergence Magazine asked me to write about economics, I said, well, I couldn't possibly do that. I'm a botanist. I don't know anything about economics. And really, I didn't. But I do know about the economy of nature. And so for me, it's kind of a reflection, a meditation on seeing how is our economy, what are the values that underpin our economy? And looking at those and thinking deeply about them and the way in which they are, and more often are not, aligned with the economy of nature. So really my goal was to invite readers to explore the same questions that I was exploring.
This book feels like such a gift for us as readers to be able to take a step back and really look at something that most of us, I think, take a little bit for granted and are yet confronted with every day, the way that we interact with nature, what nature provides for us, what this earth provides for us. And like you said, comparing it to the economy, which I think so many people would say they maybe understand better than the natural world, that affects them more than the natural world, even though they're intertwined in all of these ways. I stopped and was really finding myself thinking about how many times do I use in any given day something that is reliant on the natural world? And when you take a step back and look at it like that, it's staggering. And I think that as readers, we're so often not used to really looking at things from that perspective, that our economy and our natural sort of order of things are so similar. And I was really struck by how often there are things that really are happening in the exact same ways.
Yeah. And it really is, just as you experienced, about paying attention to something that just kind of runs in the background, doesn't it? We don't often think about the way the natural world works or the way the economy works. We're just enmeshed in it. And so it really is a chance to kind of pay attention to something that we don't normally do. And especially, I like how you were saying that, we take for granted what the earth provides for us. And we think often of it as just sort of our due. It's just there. But this too is a chance to say, well, how do we think about that? Do we think about the way that the earth provides for us as commodities, as property, as natural resources, or as the indigenous worldview? And I think the nature economy as well invites us to think differently, to say, well, maybe these are gifts. Maybe these are gifts from the living world. And if we think about it that way, everything changes.
I think readers of Braiding Sweetgrass won't be shocked by this sentiment because it's present there as well. And this sort of just combines with that to say, now let's take a step closer in and really look at its connection to the economy. And as someone myself who does not consider themselves having a great grasp on the economy, in fact, it often infuriates and confounds me. I think that looking at it from a different light was really like, oh, I mean, I know there's things that are just always going to be not my forte because it's not something I've studied and really want to mesh myself anymore in, frankly. But comparing it to nature, that is something that feels like when you are able to connect with it, it's not like a an infuriating thing. It's a relief to be able to say, oh, yes, there is a way of things. And I really
Yes.
felt that in this book.
Oh, I'm so glad, because that's very much where this book came from, is in, being infuriated and confounded, as you said, by my own complicity in this economy, that when I really look at it, I think I don't want to be a part of that. But what are the alternatives? And as a Serviceberry or a gift economy at least provokes our imagination of, hey, could we do this differently?
I think too, I mean, as I was reading, at first I was like, what is a Serviceberry? Like, like really just going in and being like, that's not something I knew. And so then I was like, well, I have to go do research and see where that grows and find that out. And even that like spark of curiosity to be like, there are so many things in the natural world that I don't know about or that aren't familiar to me, but I want to know.
I'm glad you got to know Serviceberries a bit, because they're really amazing and kind of the perfect vehicle or the metaphor for talking about the gifts of the living world, because they're everywhere. They grow so many different places. And as I explain in the book, people might think they don't know Serviceberries, but maybe they know shadberries, maybe they know Juneberries, maybe they know Saskatoons. Those are all the different names for this plant that provides really abundantly, but it's not an article of commerce. You can't go to the grocery store and get Juneberries or Serviceberries. So it also demands paying attention to the hedgerows and the fields and the hills around you. So it's an invitation to step outside too.
Yes, I saw Juneberries and then I was like, I know that. That's the one that stuck to me. And then I was like looking and seeing pictures, and I'm the kind of reader where it takes me doubly long always to read a book like this, because I have to spend a little bit of time then afterwards Googling everything that I didn't know about in there, because I want to know what everything looks like and where it grows. And I was like, this is a great excuse for me to really learn some new things and go down some rabbit holes, which I always love in a book.
Good. Well, and John Burgoyne's beautiful illustrations
Mhm.
to help us get a little bit of a shortcut to that, right? To say, oh, they're so detailed, they're so botanically rich. I love them, and I think it too will help people do just what you did and said, oh yeah, I think I've seen these. Maybe I'll stop and pay attention.
And getting an excuse, I think so often now, all we need is the slightest excuse to just have that spark of curiosity. So often I find in my life that I feel very stuck in this is the way it has to be, and this is the way we just have all accepted that it is. Everything feels very, I don't know, a little bit stuck sometimes. And something like this book, and something like seeing an animal that I don't normally see on I mean, even though living in New York City, I don't know, recently I saw a raccoon, and that really just threw me off for days because I was so excited about seeing something different. And like those little sparks of curiosity really can do so much for connecting us back to the world and to each other.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned what you see in New York City, because so often we think that nature's over there. We have to go to a state park or a national park. We have to go to the wilderness in order to encounter these beings. But I'll bet you there are serviceberries, within a half mile of where you are sitting, either planted by people or planted by birds, who of course love them and are in that cycle of reciprocity with them. So yeah, paying attention to the natural world is possible wherever we are, and wherever we are, we're also in reciprocity with the living world. But we can forget that so easily in a city where we're not, where we think that the things that take care of us come from the market. And they do, but where did the market get them? It came from the land.
I struggle every day with my relationship to pigeons. I think I want to be better to them, but they scare me, and I have to really work on it, but I'm trying.
I've made a similar pact with myself of thinking about organisms that, I'm less happy with. Like for me, it's starlings, which are abundant around the farms out here. I think, well, I don't want to live in a world full of starlings. But then I think, wait a second, they're survivors, they're adaptable, they are our neighbors, and I'm trying to learn to love them because I truly believe that we are in the position that we are today in this age of biodiversity loss and the age of the sixth extinction, right? Because we haven't loved and paid attention to the organisms that are around us. So I'm like you. I'm trying to broaden my consideration and my circle of compassion for all the beings.
It's a commitment, but we're gonna do it. I believe in us. And I love what you were saying about reciprocity. That is something that I noted again and again as I was reading the Serviceberry and reading your work in general. This idea that we are in conjunction with nature in a way that we do get so much back when we put so much in, that when we act with care, with love, with compassion for the world around us, we get that back. And so many of us are not able to see it because we have never seen it modeled for us in many ways. And yet there are so many little places where we can say, you know, we only harvest so much of this because when we do, it grows back better, or we know where to get certain things because it's going to increase the next year's crop. And just having that sort of compassion for the world, it would change so much if we could all sort of just immediately implant it across the world.
Oh, I couldn't say it better, Jenna. Exactly. It's sort of this worldview shift of paying attention to what truly sustains us. I am fond of one of my favorite statistics out there is this notion that I think it's eco-psychologists and educators who have come up with these data that tell us that the average American can recognize 100 corporate logos, probably more, right? And fewer than 10 plants. That feels messed up to me that our attention has been totally hijacked by corporate entities saying, pay attention to this, not to the living world. And so paying attention to the living world and being grateful for what's around us is really an act of resistance in this commodity driven society to say, no, I'm going to learn my plants. And I don't necessarily mean, learning their botanical names, but just getting to know them and to be appreciative of the gifts that they provide for us.
And I think being able to say and to really take a step back and say, what if I wasn't the most important creature on the planet? What if I was the same as every other being and I didn't have a right to do whatever I wanted? Not in a way where I think, oh gosh, what if something bad happens, but just what if also everything else had a right to be here as much as I did? And that changes a lot of things. I think even when we think we believe that all the time, it's so easy to slip into not acting upon that.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because that too is at the heart of the Western worldview, isn't it? That's kind of like we're here alone and all those other species are here in service to us, or they're our property. And what you're articulating is the kinship worldview of saying, oh, we're all in this together. None of us are more important than the other. Within our own bodies and our own societies, it's easy to forget that until you realize, that each of us is, think about our microbiome, these tiny microbes that we don't pay any attention to until they're not there. And then we're sick until they're not there on the land, and then the land is damaged. So yeah, it's easy to put ourselves first. And I love those moments when your head explodes and says, oh, they are as important as I am. And in Potawatomi, this virtue of what you're articulating of humility is one of our cardinal virtues. And it doesn't mean humility like being meek, withdrawn. What it means is I am not any more important than you. And that you could be human or more than human. But what I love about that is that means that we tend to think of ourselves as super important. And so that means that earthworms are super important too. And the raccoon that you were talking about is super important. So to me, it's exciting. It's a way to enliven the world with the importance of all of our more than human relatives.
Especially now when everything, I think, gets boiled down to like talking points or into slogans or easy to say, yes, we're facing climate disaster, we're facing these things, but only just now are we starting to, we've had these like massive weather events that are so clearly related to things. And I still feel like there's so little connection to actually what it means for individuals, what it means for individual species that are not, humans. And I just feel like there's so many people that still are uninterested in anything that is like outside of their direct sphere of knowledge. And this is why I think books like the Serviceberry, like Braiding Sweetgrass, they're so important to just give us a different lens that we're able to look at things at, and especially saying, it's kind of not our, maybe in a way that is like, it's not your fault you don't know this yet, but now don't worry about what you haven't known before. Here's what we can do from now. Here's what you can know now. And I think that kind of perspective makes it a little bit easier to say, okay, yeah, maybe I haven't always done exactly what I wished I would have, but what if I could start right now?
That's the invitation, isn't it? Right. When you think about, both our educational systems, a lot of our social values and conditioning have turned us away from attending to the natural world. And that's really not a coincidence, right? Our economy, which is relentless in trying to extract from the living world, the values of compassion for the living world are really not coincident with extraction, are they? We would object. We would object if we had a worldview that said, wait, these are our kinfolk. These are the beings who are taking care of us. And you want to, trample them, bulldoze them. So it's both uplifting to be in kinship and in relationship to those organisms, but I think it also creates a sense of responsibility and say, just as you did, I didn't know this before, but I do now. And what am I going to do about it? How can I enter into reciprocity with the living world in whatever way makes sense? And that's one of the things that I really tried to do in the Serviceberry, and of course in Braiding Sweetgrass too, is to say, how do we answer that question of what are the gifts that we human people have to give back in return for everything that we have taken?
After reading the Serviceberry, I ran what I'm calling my Robin Wall Kimmerer experiment, in which I asked a bunch of people if they felt like they loved the earth and if they felt like the earth loved them back.
Yeah.
And I got very surprising answers of a lot of people saying, oh, I don't know. I don't think the earth doesn't. How could the earth love us back? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you. Let's go figure it out. There were so many moments where I'm like, oh, I think that is a piece of the puzzle. A piece of the problem is that disconnect from feeling a love back from, like some people were like, oh yeah, I love nature. I love to go out and hike. I love to, spend time outside, all these things, but they can't understand the other half of it, what we get back.
Yeah, it's true. And in the Western worldview, where the land is reduced to stuff, even stuff that we love and enjoy, we don't think about the land as having any agency, right? And that changes everything. And it's so inherent in a Potawatomi way of thinking, where when we talk about the land as Mother Earth, it's not just an empty metaphor. It is the one who loves us, who gives us everything that we need, who comforts us, who gives us food and medicine and beauty and lessons. Like, wow, that's a mother right there. And to me, that represents love. And I feel pretty convinced, as I bet if the people that you talk to, I'd love you did that experiment, Jenna. Would we harm the land if we thought the land loved us back? I think we know the answer to that.
the world that we live in, I feel like, and I could talk about this forever, and as many of my friends, I think, would say, we know you could, how the world is now designed to keep us isolated. Everything in society is sort of created to not only keep us apart from each other, but from community, from, learning, from empathy, for each other and for the earth, for other creatures. Everything now is so siloed, and we, I think, lose this ability to connect. And I know for me, spending time in nature and learning about it, and really, and by learning, I mean, even from just like going out and looking around and trying to see things I've never seen before, it's a feeling of connection that is different than I think that you can get in most other ways.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it is, of course, it's physical, when we're out in the woods or on the shore or on the water. But I think it's also emotional, right? That feeling of belonging, of being connected that we miss in so much of our lives. And again, we have an economy which really prioritizes a kind of hyper individuality, that what matters is that individuals get theirs, get their share, and indeed often have a lot more than their share, right? So the wages of that hyper individualism we see in the economy, we see written on the land. But as you're pointing out, we also feel it emotionally to be isolated from each other and isolated from the land. When we feel that sense of connection, I think you and I would agree, you just feel better. You feel at home. And when we feel at home and confident and solid in our identities as a member of this community, we behave very, very differently. So again, I think it's no accident that there are these forces at work that try to separate us from each other and from the land. But the good thing is we have the power to change that by what we pay attention to, where we spend our very precious life energy.
And though we may not always, I think, be taught how to be in community or be in healthy communities, I guess, I think there are lots of ways to sort of be in community that don't really benefit us, but to sort of learn how to be in these productive and healthy communities with other people and with the land. Like, the best part is, I think so much of like when I was reading the Serviceberry is like, you can just do it. You can learn it. You can do it. It's not like, yes, there are challenges, and yes, there are going to be, some ugly truths that we sort of have to look at. I think to be able to do these, we kind of have to let ourselves see how bad things are. And yet you can just do it. You can make those steps.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to see how bad things are, because that's motivating. Wow, let's not turn away from that. Let's really look at it. And then the emotional and intellectual response to that is, well, let's fix it. And that's why in the Serviceberry, as well as in Braiding Sweetgrass, I really try to think about, well, once we're aware of these, what can we do? What are the simple things that embody this reciprocity with the living world? And, in the Serviceberry, that's why I not only talk about things like berry picking, eating locally, supporting seasonal foods, etc., but simple things like the gift economies that are all around us that begin with lending a book to somebody. And you scale that up to little free libraries. And then you scale that up to public libraries. And then you scale that up to commons thinking in the political arena of we don't have to own everything. We could share things. And then we reduce our environmental impact and at the same time create the community that we long for, that there's no way we can buy. We cannot buy community, but we do it through these acts of reciprocity. And to me, that's really liberating to say, I'm lonely for my community. How is it that I could act in such a way to create it for myself, for my family, and for people around me? And to me, that's the power of gift economy thinking.
I'm so glad you brought up the book gift economy, because it's one of my very favorites. I smiled so much when I was reading in the Serviceberry about little free libraries, and then the public library, which is one of my favorite places on the entire planet, is a public library. And I think that there's just nothing like stepping in there, and the knowledge from the books, the knowledge from the free services, the knowledge from librarians. There's nothing that can sort of take the place of those things. And it is such a good mirror, again, for what can it look like when community is working and functioning well. And there's nothing like walking into like a bustling public library to seeing that at work.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
And then it makes me think like, it doesn't feel all that different from thinking about like a bustling public library to thinking about like a bustling forest floor, and you've got different creatures running around, you've got birds flying, you've got bugs that I'm trying to avoid, you've got fungus, you've got all these things. That kind of is the same as like a bustling human community. You've got these bustling communities right outside, and to sort of take the time to slow down and look at that is a moment where even thinking about it now, I'm like, that it just like is a weight lifted off to think like, oh yeah, that's all still out there, whether I'm here in New York City or not.
Yes. And I love putting that in conversation with the idea of that feeling that a library gives you, because you feel sort of secure, and all that knowledge is there, all those resources are there. Well, if you think about all the citizens of a forest as books on a shelf of the library of nature, all of their ways of being are there too. The intelligence of a mycorrhizal network, for example, right? It's all there. And it could give the same delight of, when you're browsing a shelf in the library and a book jumps out at you, you think, I never knew someone would pay attention to that. It's the same with the natural world. Is your mind just opens up to all of the connections that are there. And thinking about, the intelligence of a mycorrhizal network, or the intelligence of Serviceberry and the birds and the whole ecosystem around that, I think also helps us into this science and practice of biomimicry, which is also at the heart of the Serviceberry, to say, what could we as human people learn from how nature is organized to kind of reclaim our and reshape the systems that we live in. And that's really exciting to me. This idea of thinking about how the natural world could be a model for us of other ways to be. And it's right there. It's right there in front of us.
I love that as well, thinking through, especially because I think for a lot of people, there's still this kind of ongoing misconception that like hard-boiled science or economics and this more nature-based, respectful, mindful approach, they're completely at odds, and that they don't overlap, that we can't, have both science and also a compassionate approach. But of course that isn't true. And things like biomimicry open those doors to say, no, there's both. We can take these things and apply them to our, very human and very specific processes and be like, no, both are true. They're both here.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think so often, and I experience this pretty much every day as a practicing scientist, is that when we think about how scientific knowledge advances in this really objective way, where we say, we're going to set aside our subjective feelings, we're going to set aside our values and just look at how the natural world works. There's a lot of power there, a lot of power. But when we set aside our values for scientific investigation, that doesn't mean that we set our values aside in decision making about how we want to live and what kind of culture we're in. I think we just have to really know the power of each of those ways of thinking and not conflate them. Yes, there are times when our values don't factor into what we're learning about the natural world in a hypothesis test, for example. But we are never going to solve the climate crisis or the social justice crises without bringing in our values. And that's what I really try to argue for in the Serviceberry as well. What would an economy look like that honored human values not just return on investment.
And I would say as humans, we are very rarely good at not letting our values bleed into almost everything we do, for better or worse. We've never quite cracked that code, even in science. And I think that maybe because we're not meant to. I mean, I feel like so often when I think of the best decisions I've made or that I've seen my friends make or that I've seen this country make or the world make, they are value-based decisions. They have that moral fiber as well. It's not like the science is out here shaping our lives for the best in many ways.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that we can say that about economic systems as well. Yeah. Let it be in harmony and informed by our values.
There's so much that just as we read these works, and I think that, along going back to sort of this library metaphor things, this is kind of what we turn to books for so often. We turn to what someone else has said, what someone else has done before us, or another way of thinking that isn't quite our own to say, okay, I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to open myself up to something different. And especially when it comes to, I think so much in the Western world, things that maybe haven't worked. And we go, okay, what are our other options when we're looking at sort of these indigenous ways of existing in the world, and to say, I'm ready to put whatever I have aside and learn something else.
Yeah, that every book, and I love all the books behind you, every book is an invitation to learn, isn't it? I don't like to read books that tell me what to think, right? I love books that say, hey, look at this. Just as we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, our delight in being in the woods and saying, look at that other way of being. Look at that story unfolding there. For the delight of that, for the curiosity of that, and the invitation to say, maybe there's something there that is meaningful and has guidance for me. And so that's what I look for in a book. And I hope what I've given to readers is just a chance to say, hey, look at that. Look at the economy of serviceberries. Look at the extractive market economy that we're in, and what do you see? That's all. What do you see? And then I think we're different for seeing.
I agree. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask, as a bookseller, we're touching on it a little bit here, but on your literary influences and some things that you've loved and have shaped you as a reader and a writer.
Oh, what a wonderful question. I really think about in my own journey from being a scientist to a writer in the public sphere. I really like to acknowledge the work of Lauren Isley, a wonderful essayist who was a scientist, but also a poet. And he did amazing science and was often criticized for also being a humanist. So as a young person, he was a model for me of, oh, you can do both. And in fact, you should do both. Stephen Jay Gould, an evolutionary biologist, who was also a fabulous storyteller, who invited people to look at the world, to look at scientific knowledge, and think about, what does that mean in my life? So those two in particular were models for me, or at least catalysts for me in my transformation to writing for the public as opposed to just writing for the science community.
I love that, because I think so often people get nervous around books that maybe cover subjects they feel like they just could never understand. Or, I don't know enough about that even to start reading. But I think very rarely have I, even a book where I'm like, I might have jumped a few steps and jumped in on a book that maybe is a little above what I know and something. There's always like another thing to learn. And especially when the writing is beautiful and the sentences can speak to you, I'm like, I bet you'll still get something out of it, even if some parts are a little over my head.
Yeah, I agree. It's the feeling as well as the knowledge that changes us.
And I love the feelings and the knowledge that I get when I read your work. And I do feel as well, like we touched on, that there are actionable things that we can do now, individually and collectively, to really start making those shifts. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of those actionable things that you feel that we could all start to do maybe in our lives to give ourselves a little bit different perspective and a little bit of space when it comes to these issues?
Thank you for asking that, because that was something I really wrestled with, that it doesn't feel like it's enough just to ask the question of why is our economy destroying what we love and why are we letting that happen? What would it look like to resist that? What would it look like to create something different? And I'm far from having those answers. But what I wanted to do is think with my reader. And so things like we're not going to dismantle extractive capitalism anytime soon, but couldn't we create and nurture a gift economy around us that enhances our sense of belonging, which is based on a currency which isn't money, but is gratitude and relationship with each other and with the living world. So, thinking about those elements of sharing economies, where community gardens, community tool sheds, back to libraries, and thinking about things like local foods, seasonal foods. When I wrestle with this, man, I love raspberries. I just love raspberries, that big old raspberry patch in my garden. But, they're not out in January. And so I think, oh, I'm going to buy raspberries in January. And then I think, what is the carbon footprint of those? What is the economic damage which is caused by me in upstate New York eating raspberries? And what is my relation to raspberries? They now become something that I think I deserve, that it's a commodity, they're my property. What if in a gift economy thinking, we say seasonal foods are to be enjoyed in the season? Sweet, you're from Minnesota. Sweet corn in August, okay? We don't bother even thinking about sweet corn outside of August, right? Because it's a gift. What if we transferred that kind of thinking to say, well, I'm not going to consume things that have such a big environmental impact. I'm going to wait till those gifts come to me, not force the earth to give them to me, and to create an economy which does so much damage in the process. So those kinds of steps, I think the way that we meaningfully engage with our food systems can be an important pathway to thinking about a gift economy.
And that feels manageable. Those are things that are like, yeah, we can make those steps. And sure, there will be things we have to give up. But I think in the long term, the things that we gain go so beyond any little thing of giving up, oh gosh, I really wish I could have a raspberry, for us to have a functioning planet in 100, 200, 300 years. There's a bit of a trade-off there.
Well said. Raspberries in January or a functional planet. I think we know what we're going to choose.
Agree. I should say, I wonder too if you could talk a little bit about sort of a perfect reader for this book. Someone that you really hope finds this on a shelf or a table or given by a friend. A reader that you really are like, I want you to find the Serviceberry.
For me, the audience that I had in mind were people who, like me, felt this deep complicity and wrongness in the economy, but don't really understand why it is this way and what we can do to get ourselves out of it. And so I think that's the perfect reader, somebody who loves the natural world, but may not be deeply familiar with natural processes. And so it's a window on how does nature's economy work in a really, I think, accessible way. But it's also the journey of me thinking like, well, why does our economy function the way that it does, and what are the alternatives? So my ideal reader is somebody who might be a bit frustrated and wants to go on this journey of curiosity.
I love that. I think there are going to be so many people that, whether they're longtime readers of Braiding Sweetgrass and they know what they're going to get, or this is something that they're picking up for the first time, I think there is so much packed within this little book that really gives us a chance to grow and to learn and to step back from the world that is so like incessant all the time and pause. and reflect. And I can't wait for more people to get their hands on this one.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you so much for joining us today. The Serviceberry is out now, and I can't wait for people to read it. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Top Off. We're going to recommend a couple of great books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of Serviceberry. I'm Mark at my Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, but I'm handing things off to two of my very favorite book friends. I've got Donald and Jamie here in the studio, I guess. We're actually doing it all through Zoom, so a collective studio. Donald, I'm going to go ahead and have you kick things off. I think all three of us are very excited for a new Anything by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's absolutely brilliant. Braiding Sweetgrass is one of my favorite books, but let's go ahead and kick things off. Donald, what do you have for us?
So first of all, I wanted to say the Serviceberry it is a welcome addition to her books that she has. It's great too for the upcoming holidays. Just a great book to give to somebody. It really opens up your eyes to the importance of nature, to that specific Serviceberry, birds, just nature in general. And so the book I picked, and this was a little tough, right? Because there's just so many things you can tie together. But I was really looking for something that kind of counterbalanced that a little bit. And so I picked The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. And this really deals with how plant intelligence offers us a real understanding of life on Earth, including human life. As we know, so much of our existence is due to plants and trees. And that's what she's really talking about in here, is how through light funneling into plants and really helping them grow, it has provided the sustenance that we need as a human race to survive. But even beyond that, she really spent some time talking about different kinds of plants, different kinds of scenarios where plants have really influenced different parts of our life and our existence, as well as looking at how light over different periods of time has helped not only plant life in general and nature on the planet, but how that has positively and negatively affected us through our own negative involvement in our environment. If you're looking for something that will give you some insight into plant life, give you some insight into how to balance your own personal life with being a more nature and earth conscious person, I highly suggest The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. And Jamie, what do you have for us?
Well, I'm recommending another small but hopeful book, and that is Cy Montgomery's The Hummingbirds Gift, Wonder, Beauty, and Renewal on Wings. And like the Serviceberry, this is a beautiful piece of nature writing that really highlights the connections between all living things and how our interactions with nature, even on a tiny scale, really serve to enrich our lives. And in this case, our interactions with animals and caring for animals in particular. So as the book opens, Montgomery finds two just impossibly tiny orphaned baby hummingbirds. And in a voice that is both informative and poetic, she details caring for these just impossibly small little marvels and interweaves these anecdotes with the anatomy and history of the hummingbird and its role in nature. Every part of this book is suffused with her passion and her sense of duty to these creatures. She's responsible for preparing them to return to nature. And it's a painstaking process. She details feedings and creating a safe habitat and how important it is to care for them day and night so that they'll live while trying to give them independence so that they can care for themselves very soon. She documents their first flights, their growing strength, their resilience, their feats of acrobatics, and we share her feelings of wonder and of reverence as she prepares to release them into just the right area with just the right food sources and environment so that they can really thrive in their fresh start. And witnessing their growth and their successful relief is its own reward to her. So if you've ever read any Cy Montgomery books, or if you've ever even seen a photo of her, I think you're struck by her love of nature and of these animals that she writes about and the true joy that the natural world really brings to her. That's what she gets from these interactions. And I think her work illustrates that many of these themes of beauty and reciprocity, that these same themes that you see in Serviceberry. So again, that is The Hummingbird's Gift, Wonder, Beauty, and Renewal on Wings by Cy Montgomery.
Yes, to both of those. Thank you so much. And it makes so much sense that you both hit on topics that really lean on the reciprocity and the cyclical parts of nature that we are duty bound and I think honor bound to receive and nurture. Much in the way that Serviceberry can connect the dots from something small to something major and something personal. I think both of those books really kind of tie all of that together in a lovely way. So thank you very much. That is all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss anything. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. I'm going to go ahead and let Donald and Jamie tell us where to find them since they were our major stars of the day. Donald, where can we find you?
You can find me at BN Fairlane Green.
And I'm at BN Plaza KC.
Thank you both so much, and thanks everybody. Tune in next time. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.